What's in a name? When you think about a name, it's as simple as a label that we place on other people in order to kind of identify themselves as we talk to one another. But isn't there much more to a name? I mean, when you say somebody's name, oftentimes you think about character traits. You think about identity statements. I mean, if I gave you a few names, likely there'll be a few things that come to mind for you. If I gave you names like Alexander the Great, Rosa Parks, Albert Einstein. I mean, simple names, but probably conjure up a lot of thoughts for us. We think about leadership, we think about courage, we think about brilliance. There's so much to a name. I'm really intrigued by some names that were ascribed to Jesus, written some 700 years before the very first Christmas. It came off the pen of this prophet. His name was Isaiah, living 700 years before Jesus, but yet the people of God were in a really, really challenging time. Their enemies were pressing on them. They were facing all kinds of uncertainty, but yet into this dark, difficult moment, Isaiah penned these words. He said, "For unto us a child is born. For unto us a son is given. And he'll be given this name, these names," he said, that he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. It's kind of fascinating into such a difficult time and dark season back in the time that Isaiah lived. He talked about this one that was going to come, that when he came into this world, one of the names that he would possess, the identity that he would unfold is this Prince of Peace. Here's what I want you to know. Peace is not just a thing. It's not just an idea. Peace is a person. His name is Jesus. And here's the beautiful thing about peace. Peace is something that deep inside of all of us, we all long for. How many of you would say you'd love a little bit more peace in your life? Anybody? Is there anybody who would say, I love a little bit more peace in our world? Anybody? Is there anybody who would say, no, I'm good. I don't need any more, right? Because this deep down in us, we want peace. We long for peace. We desire peace. And yet oftentimes, peace gets attached to circumstances we find ourselves in. Maybe there's a young person in the room that peace feels elusive because as a young person, you're battling some things that are contributing some difficulties with mental health, and yet you find something that peace is what you want, but peace has been so hard to experience. Or maybe you're a parent, and you long to experience peace, but yet you're facing all kinds of unexpected things, and you want peace, but peace has been really hard to find lately. Or maybe you're a grandparent, and you look at the state of our world and the state that we find ourselves in, and you get really sad by what that means for your grandkids, and you want peace, but peace is so difficult to find, because if you're anything like me, sometimes peace is almost exclusively attached to the circumstances or how things are going in my life, that if things are good in my life, then I have peace. But if things are not good in my life, then I don't have any peace at all. It kind of makes me think of this. Like if you kind of pictured this strand of lights as kind of the timeline of your life, or maybe you just picture lots of different things going on in your life. Like one of the lights represents the job that you hold. Another light represents a relationship you're in. Another light represents some things that you're up to in your journey. But each one of the lights represents a different part of your journey. Now, if you're anything like me, if something goes wrong or if you face really challenging circumstances, it's almost like I face some challenging moments at work, and when that burns out, it's like the peace and the light goes out in all of my life. Like if I lost my job or if a deal fell through or whatever the situation is, if there was no peace, it's not like I didn't have peace in that moment, in that situation. I lost peace in my entire life. And maybe if the circumstance changed because we got a new job or the deal did come through, then maybe, just maybe, the light of peace comes back on in our life. Or maybe it's a different type of situation. Maybe you've got a significant relationship. You're married, you're dating somebody, you've got a really, really close friendship. And when the relationship's good, everything feels at peace. But if that relationship goes awry or if there's deep conflict, when that happens, it's not just that the conflict is contained to that relationship. It's like the light of peace is eradicated in all of my life. It's like the peace is left my journey in some way, but maybe, just maybe, if that relationship is restored in some way or it falls on a little bit better times, maybe peace will come back to my journey. The peace will be relit in my life. If we're not careful, peace can get tied to the circumstances that we find ourselves in at times. But what if peace wasn't just an idea? What if peace wasn't just a thing? What if peace actually is a person and his name is Jesus? Because if that's true, I would like to think that the peace could be something that we could experience no matter what is going on in life. And that peace could be pervasive no matter what's happening in our past, no matter what's happening in our present, no matter what will happen at some point in the future. Here's what I like to think of the peace that Jesus brought as the Prince of Peace that very first Christmas. That I would say is the kind of peace that's a peace despite our past. One of the things that happened before Jesus was born is Mary, his earthly mother, she sang this song. And there's so many powerful things that were the lyrics of the song that she sang. It's recorded for us in the book of Luke chapter 1. Here's Mary's words. She says this, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God." And then she says this, she calls God my Savior, for he's been mindful of the humble state of his servant. I love that Jesus' earthly mom, Mary, before he was even born, she referred to Jesus as her Savior because she recognized she needed saving. Now, we don't know all the details, but we do know that Mary came from a more peasant type of upbringing. She was very poor in nature. She might have looked back over her journey in the past and she would say, like, God can't use me. There's nothing about me that would allow me to be the one that God would choose to bring his son into the world. That seems like crazy talk. In other words, like I come from such a humble beginning that how could God redeem that in such a way to do something significant with my life? And maybe your life is not that much different than Mary's life, that oftentimes when we look back on our past, we can disqualify ourselves from all kinds of things. And if our past is significant enough, oftentimes it can rob our peace in the present and the future because our past has a hold of us, that we made some sort of mistake, that somebody did something to us in the past, and because of that past event, it's kind of taken a hold of us. And there is no peace, there kind of is no freedom. It reminds me of a guy by the name of Gary Richmond. He found himself in this Los Angeles zoo. And he was there and he was in this kind of warehouse room and he saw these 3 cages of some red-tailed hawks. He asked somebody about them because they were in cages, not in display in the zoo in any way, not able to be flying around in some sort of contained area. They were in these cages in kind of a back room. And somebody told him that it was a part of some sort of poaching defunct case. It was caught up in the legal trial in some ways. And he realized that because of the nature of legal proceedings, it's likely that these red-tailed hawks are gonna be trapped in these cages in this back storage room for quite some time. And that just didn't sit well with him. And so he decided, even though he didn't have permission to, that he was gonna let them free. And so he opened up this big garage doors that didn't lead to some sort of display. It actually led to the outside so they could literally be free. He opened up their cages. He tried to shoo them out a little bit so they could experience freedom. But he watched these red-tailed hawks not leave the cage nor leave the room. They just kind of stuck right where they're at. So he tried to shoo them a little bit further and try to get them to go off their perch. And the moment they wandered out of the cage, they quickly went right back to the cage. They were free, but they didn't live in the freedom that they had. How true is that for so many of our own journeys? That I believe when God sent his son Jesus in this world, he was not just a Prince of Peace. Part of the reason he was the Prince of Peace is he liberates us from our past. That whatever our past journey has been, no matter where we've been or what we've done or even what's been done to us, it no longer has to dictate who we are and who we become. We might be products of our past, but we don't have to be prisoners of our past. And the truth is, Jesus came to set us free so that you and I could experience peace, but oftentimes we live caged up in our own journey. But what if peace wasn't just an idea? What if peace wasn't just a thing? What if peace was actually a person that came to bring peace that we could experience despite our past because God has released you from it. Here's what I believe, that God in Jesus has released you from your past, and somebody needs to hear this today. If God has released you from your past, you've got to release yourself from your past. Because there's peace in the freedom that he brings. There's peace despite our past. I would say there's a kind of peace that permeates our present, like a peace that permeates our present. Let me take us back to this song of Mary. In Luke chapter 1, a few lyrics later, Mary writes this. She says, his mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation. I love this word mercy, because it's something that you and I need in the here and now often. Now, I don't know what's going on in your journey right now, but I would imagine in a room this full, and there's many people who've experienced one of three things. You've either just come out of a really hard time, you're in the midst of a hard time, or you're one day going to end up in a hard time. Because Jesus was pretty clear that in this world, we're gonna face many troubles, but we can trust in God, we can also trust in Jesus. And to see us through the present circumstances, oftentimes we need God's mercy to meet us where we're at. Now, I don't know if you're in the midst of a hard season right now. I think about my own journey, and there are aspects of my own story right now that we're facing some really, really difficult circumstances. And there are times, candidly, that I prayed that God would change our circumstances, that God would do something different. And at least to this point, God hasn't yet done so. And if I'm not careful, I can allow the present circumstances to rob me of every ounce of peace in my journey. But what if it didn't have to be that way? Because the truth is, even though God hasn't currently changed the circumstances that I prayed that he would do, I've been a Christ follower long enough to look back over my journey, and I'm telling you, God has always been faithful, which gives me the confidence that God will be faithful and he will always be faithful in my journey. Do you agree? That God has been, God is, God always will be faithful in our journey. And as I look back over my life, there have been other hard seasons in my journey, and God has always done one of two things, if not both. And God has always met me in those hard moments. God has always given me the ability to either overcome the challenge in some way by his intervention, or that God will meet us in the pain. He doesn't necessarily change the circumstances, but he, in the way that only could, can bring purpose in the pain. That God will either help us overcome, or he'll bring purpose through it, or sometimes God does both. And if God has always done that, what makes me think that God wouldn't do that again and again and again? Because I believe that a God is a God that can do the impossible. I think about these words, that God is the God of the impossible. His might is matchless, his power is boundless, his love is limitless, his grace is endless. He has the power to move mountains and heal what is broken. He's got the power to shut down evil. He can not be outsmarted, outmaneuvered, or contained or restrained in any way. He is the all-seeing, all-knowing, all-hearing, all-powerful, all-present, and always ready to rescue kind of God. No enemy can defeat him. No problem can confuse him. No darkness can conceal him. No fear can affect him. No need is below him, and no power is above him. He is your maker, your sustainer, your forgiver, your creator. He's the lover of your soul. He is the one who sees you and hears you. He's the light, the hope, the friend, the guide that we so desperately need. He's the author of life. He's the creator of the heavens and the earth. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. He's the Lord of lords, and he's the King of kings. Nothing is impossible for him. Because why? Because he is our Prince of Peace. Peace is not just an idea, it's not just a thing. Peace is a person. He's the Prince of Peace. He came that very first Christmas, that no matter what's going on in my present, I can still experience his peace. We can experience peace despite our past. We can experience a peace that permeates our present. I think that we can also experience a peace that gives us an assurance for our future. It gives us an assurance for what's ahead. Because sometimes what robs us about our future is we're so uncertain about what is ahead, or we're fearful about what is ahead, and that compromises or costs us every ounce of peace. But what if the kind of peace that he brings gives us certainty about what's ahead? Mary gets this in the same song, Luke chapter 1. Mary says this, she says, he has brought down rulers from their thrones and he's lifted up the humble. He's filled the hungry with good things and has sent the rich away empty. He's helped the servants Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants for how long? Forever. You believe that? Do you believe that what he came to do some 2,000 years ago was not just to change history in the moment, but to create a different outcome literally forever, for all of eternity? Here's why that matters. Is sometimes I sit in situations and I look ahead, and whatever the situation might be, if it's some sort of unknown or something that brings a lot of fear or concern, sometimes it becomes so crippling that it robs us of every ounce of peace. It's part of the reason why Jesus came not only at Christmas, but promises to return again, because there's an assurance of what God accomplished in our lives through Jesus. The beautiful thing is, you and I know the end of the story. Revelation tells us there's gonna come a day that God makes everything right through Jesus. Every wrong is made right. It says that he'll wipe every tear from your eye. There's no more death, no more dying, no more pain, because he's made everything new again. And when you know how it ends, it changes how we experience the here and now. I think about it this way. I grew up as a lifelong Chicago Cubs fan. Now, I know living in Chicago now, that doesn't probably sound very crazy, but I grew up in Texas. And I go all the way back to like age 3 or 4. I wore like full Cubs uniform, sliding around the house. I was a diehard Cub fan as a small kid. I was one of those kids that WGN ruined me as a kid, because there were only a few baseball teams that played on national TV all the time, and the Cubs were one of those. And so I fell in love with the lovable losers. And I was a diehard cheering fan for so many terrible seasons. I watched the Cubs lose 11 times in person before I ever saw them win. It was a rough growing up time, right? And for anybody who's been a lifelong Cub fan, like you know, it was 108 years before the year 2016 came around. What a beautiful year. I mean, there were some other great seasons for the Cubs. There were other moments that the Cubs got our hopes up, but I talked about the cheer of being a Cub fan for a long time was like this. You go, oh, that's the way you experienced it. But 2016, we had the downer first, and then all of a sudden it looks like there's hope. We made it to Game 7 of the World Series. Now, I lived in Las Vegas at the time. I had a lot of people over at my house for Game 7. They were not interested in watching the game. They were interested in watching me watch the game. Because they said that watching me ride the highs of highs and the lows of lows was the most entertaining thing. And so people were coming, they were bringing their camera, they were taking pictures of me. If you remember Game 7, the Cubs jumped out to the early lead. And I thought, this is absolutely amazing. But if you've been a Cubs fan for any amount of time, you know it's not going to happen this easy. And so there's a moment where the Indians came roaring back in the most unlikely way. I was stressed out of my mind. I brought a few pictures that my friends took of me. This is about in the 5th or 6th inning. I'm sitting on the couch. I don't know why I have 2 hats on. I don't know where this second hat came from. I'm worried out of my mind. You fast forward a couple innings. I couldn't sit down any longer. Like I'm standing up, I'm roaming around the house, I'm leaning on a chair. Like I'm not in good shape. I'm stressed out of my absolute mind. Then a rain delay happens. I don't think my heart can handle it. My mom is like ready to dial 911, bring the ambulance, just take him away. He's like losing years of his life literally in the moment. But then the moment happened. The ground ball to third base. Chris Bryant picks it up, throws it across the diamond. I blacked out. I don't remember the final out of the World Series. I literally fell on the ground. My wife put the Chicago W flag on top of me. I got a picture of this. I don't remember the moment. I've never been more stressed in my life than watching Game 7 of the 2016 World Series. Why do I tell you that story? I've watched that game probably 10 times since that day, because it's amazing. But what's amazing is when I watch it today, it's all the same plays, all the same pitches, all the same at-bats, and I'm not stressed at all. And why am I not stressed? Because I know how it ends. I don't have to feel the stress and the pressure and the uncertainty and the fear because I know how it ends. And that's the beautiful thing about what the Prince of Peace brought when he came to this world. Not only do we know what happened 2,000 years ago, but he gave us the insight of what he's going to do. And what he's going to do is there's going to be a day he's going to come back to this world and he's going to make everything right. It's a promise that we can take to the bank. We know what the future looks like, and because we know the end of the story, it allows us to live with peace today. Peace is not a circumstance. Peace is not an idea. Peace is not a thing. Peace is a person. His name is Jesus. Do you know him? If you don't know him, I want to give you the opportunity to know him today. Because here's what I believe is true. If you go back to this illustration and picture this as your life, and each life representing some aspect of your life. For some of us, our past plagues us. And to you, I want you to know that the Prince of Peace came to release you from your past, to give you forgiveness for whatever that thing was. That when you put your hope and trust in him, you recognize that the peace is not a circumstance, it's not a thing, it's a person. And even if that circumstance in your past doesn't change, the light of his peace can still illuminate your life. For some of you, you're facing this overwhelmingly challenging circumstance in the present. And I'd encourage you to pray that God would intervene, that God would do something about it, that God would change it, and God might do just that, but sometimes, for whatever reason, he doesn't. But know this, that the peace is not an idea, it's not a thing, it's a person. His name is Jesus. And even if that circumstance never changes, the light of his peace can still illuminate your life. For some of us, we get crippled by the uncertainty of what's ahead. And even if we don't know what's ahead, we know ultimately how that story will end, that God will make everything right. And that even if there's a little uncertainty in the now, it doesn't take away the light of peace that can ring true in our life, because peace is not an idea. It's not a thing. It's a person. He's the Prince of Peace. His name is Jesus. Do you know him? Have you embraced his peace? If you've never made a decision to follow him, I want to give you the opportunity to put your faith, your hope, your trust fully in Jesus. So I'm just going to say a simple prayer. If you'd like to pray this prayer with me, I would just invite you to bow your heads, close your eyes, and simply pray this prayer with me. You can pray it out loud if you want. You can just pray it in your heart if you desire. But if you want to put your faith and hope in Jesus as your peace, I would invite you to take that step today. Let's bow our heads and pray together. God, thank you for sending Jesus. God, we believe that some 2,000 years ago, you took on flesh in him and you wrote yourself into our story. And God, as you did, you came on a mission that would ultimately lead you to a cross and then an empty tomb. And God, we believe that that changes everything. Because peace no longer gets attached to our circumstances. Because peace can get attached to your presence, which is with us in all circumstances. So God, can we rest in that peace? So God, in this moment, we just ask, would you forgive us from our past? Would you give us hope in our present? And will you give us assurance for what's ahead? God, we put our faith, our trust, our hope in you. With every head bowed, with every eye closed, if you made that commitment, that you want to surrender your life to follow Jesus, if you just acknowledge that commitment by placing your hand in the air, just acknowledging that commitment to God. God, I pray for every single hand that's going up in this moment. And I just ask, as we reach out to you, would you reach back to us? God, would we feel your presence in such a way that releases us from what's behind us? gives us the courage for what we're facing right now and the assurance of what's ahead. God, may we walk with courage and hope and peace. God, we look to you. We say thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you give it up for those who made spiritual decisions? You know, every year around Christmas, we close our service with the singing of Silent Night. And if you're familiar with the song, you know, at the very front of the song, it says that all is calm, all is bright. Can I burst your bubble for a second? That first Christmas, all was not calm. The circumstances that surrounded Jesus' birth were anything but calm. You might call it somewhat chaotic. And yet, there was this sense that peace on earth had come through Jesus. It's this fascinating juxtaposition that you could have peace and this chaos all in one. And so in this moment, as the light gets passed all over the room, allow that to be an image that the peace of Christ fills our hearts, fills our lives, no matter what we're facing.